Hello everyone, my name is Angeline Kneppers. I'm a Senior Advisor Storage European Office at the Global CCS Institute, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar discussing the Schlumberger Business Consulting Energy Institute's Factbook on bringing CCS to market. So I would like to also give a big welcome to our international audience. We have attendees today from around the globe, with a very significant amount of attendees, so we're very pleased. A few housekeeping matters before we start. So this webinar will be recorded and will be made available on our website along with the slides in the next few days. So in terms of questions, you can submit your questions to us simply by typing a question directly into the GoToWebinar tool panel. You will see that tab on your normally on your screen. The questions are very welcome throughout the presentation, but these will be moderated and posed at the end of the presentation. We'll also try to go through as many of them as we can in the time that we have allocated for this webinar. Let me now kick off and introduce you to the presenters, Olivier Soupa and Bruno Lajoie from Schlumberger Business Consulting Energy Institute. So Olivier is a managing director at the SBC Energy Institute. With a consulting background in organization and human resources, Olivier supervised the creation of the SBC Energy Institute, which is a not-for-profit foundation whose purpose is to develop scientific and technology research addressing the future world's energy challenges. As the managing director of the SBC Energy Institute, Olivier focused on energy supply challenges around oil and gas and on low-carbon energies. Most recently, the SBC Energy Institute has been working on CCS, carbon capture and storage, of course, enhanced geothermal systems, EGCS, and renewables, and on hydrogen-based energy storage. Our second presenter today is Bruno Lajoie, who is an analyst at the SBC Energy Institute. So in addition to having been in charge of the CCS study that we will hear about today, Bruno's work at the SBC Energy Institute also includes hydrogen-based energy storage, intermittent renewables, and climate change. Before joining the Energy Institute, Bruno has worked with an international oil company and with the IEA. He also holds a Master of Science degree in Engineering from École Centrale de Paris, with a specialization in energy and corporate finance. And now, without further additions, let me hand over to Olivier and Bruno.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm Olivier Soupa. I'm with Bruno Lajoie. So the two strong French accents that you will hear are us, basically. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, this afternoon, or this evening for you. And thank you very much for the Global CCS Institute for giving us this opportunity to talk about CCS and present our study. So basically, the following presentation that we're going to share with you is an extract of the larger study, Bringing CCS to Market, that we published 12 months ago. So the goal of this study is to give a detailed and complete view of CCS today. We have actually updated it very recently to look at technology and projects and, as much as possible, some perspective on the future. It does not aim to learn specific outcomes on CCS to experts, but it's more, the objective is more to have a good summary of CCS for decision makers. We try to convince people that CCS is important and that it should take off with this sort of study. We will show facts and figures as they are. We try to be as objective as possible and don't show excess of our optimism, but clearly our stand is CCS matters a lot. So the presentation will seek to give a status of CCS technologies, to illustrate the dynamics of CCS project, to explain through the economics why most current projects are related to oil and gas, mainly, and to give some perspectives for the next 5 years and beyond. Well, actually, before we go to the technology aspect, let's bear in mind two important messages. The first one is that CCS counts when it gets to reduce CO2 emissions. Definitely, if we want to mitigate CO2 concentration level below the 450 ppm, it will require strong action on all fronts, and one of these actions is clearly CCS. As you know, you all know this, the 450 scenario of IEA, but it's important to repeat it. Here we show that IEA recommend that CCS becomes a significant source of mitigation from 2020 onwards, and it will contribute to 17% of CO2 abatement in 2035. So by that, CCS would be the third CO2 emission reduction lever after energy efficiency and renewables. So it is a significant lever that we cannot avoid to deploy. The second message of this introduction is a bit complex to develop, but it's an important one as well, is that CCS has an important role to play because it is associated with the cost of CO2 avoided that is relatively low compared to other types of energies. So on this graph, we show that the cost of CO2 avoided, which is the real cost that has to be paid to avoid emitting 1 ton of CO2 by displacing electricity production away from a coal power plant, we see on this graph that capturing and storing emission costs between $50 to $100 per ton, which is competitive with other energy technologies like wind and solar. This explains why CCS has such a large share of emission reduction potential among power generation technologies. On this graph, we look only at power technologies, and we see that potentially up to 21% of CO2 avoided in the power sector could be through CCS at a price, at a cost of the ton of CO2 avoided, which is clearly lower than the wind onshore and solar. So that's what let's say that the background, that the important message we want to push in this introduction. Now let's look at the technologies, and our message here will be technologies are proven when it gets to CCS projects. So here we have a view of maturity of CCS technologies. So actually from left to right, we see that technologies mature with time, and as we can see, the difficulty is to move between the demonstration and the deployment phase, where the cost and the risk are the highest. That's why there's a peak in the curve. So basically, we see three parts in this graph. The first one, that is on the animation, is that the technologies used to be the first large-scale CCS integrated project are mature, as shown by the black dots on the right. These capture technologies have been used for decades in natural gas processing. CO2 pipelines and injection for EOR have been extensively used in the US since the 70s. And from this experience, we can say that there are no technical hurdles or R&D gaps that could justify waiting before building demonstration projects in other sectors than oil and gas. The second part is we show that geological sequestration of CO2 in aquifer still need to be proved as unrisked. We consider that field demonstration is the only way to gain this knowledge. We believe that small demonstration or academic R&D won't help that technology to be proven. We should move towards real demonstration projects rather than laboratories to prove that aquifers are safe. And finally, the third generation of technologies is more. The next generation of technologies will be around capture, because we need to reduce cost of this capture, and this is currently in labs. So when we see what we mean by this graph is that there's still lots of work to do in R&D. We don't challenge that, but we say that from what we have today, we can already do lots of good things. We can already move forward on the massive, on the large scale project, even though we still need to reduce costs. Therefore, we still need R&D, and especially in the capture area. A last word that is not on this slide. Consequently, the R&D budget that we have seen and that are in the longer report show that most R&D budgets are allocated to improve the efficiency of capture. Today, the CCS R&D is ranking third among low carbon technologies. It's mainly driven by corporate investment from chemical companies or oil and gas companies rather than public funding, the pure R&D. So now let's have a look at let's zoom on CO2 capture. What we see here that CO2 capture is clearly capital intensive, and it induces clearly an energy penalty. Generally, over 2/3 of the added cost of CCS comes from the capture. So the figure on the left here illustrates the order of magnitude of CO2 avoided from a 500 megawatt coal power plant when equipped with CCS. So a standard coal power plant like that will emit 3 megatons of CO2 per year. To give an order of magnitude, it represents the average emission of 500,000 cars annually, so 500,000. Adding CCS in this power plant increases the quantity of coal needed to produce the same amount of electricity by 16 to 43%, since the capture system requires additional energy to operate. And 90% of the CO2 output is captured if we add CCS on top of this plant. In reality, it would only avoid 70% of the total CO2, since we need more energy to run the CO2 plant. So we see somehow the efficiency in terms of CO2 capture, but also the energy penalty on this left-hand side graph. On the right-hand side, it's a second illustration that shows the water consumption. Actually, more water is required to cool the plant from the capture process. So, and this water penalty can increase between 10 to 80%, and it can be a major issue in some regions. We actually had interviews with people that want to launch projects in the Middle East, especially in Saudi or in Abu Dhabi, and they told us how the water penalty is an issue for them when it gets to CCS. So that was the short extract that we wanted to share with you on technology. Now let's talk about the project from capture to storage, and we will see that so far it's mainly oil and gas related projects that have moved forward. So this first graph actually illustrates a view that we have, which is basically that there has been, or there are three different timing the CCS development. From 1980, a bit before, until 2007, there has been small projects mainly aiming at testing components. We are now currently in the second phase, which is more around demonstration project. So we have so far we have accounted for 8 large projects built since the beginning of phase 1, but actually running, we have 8 of them in demonstration. And what we expect is a third phase to start by the end of the decade, where we will have CCS really used in the phase of commercialization, which is not the case today. So since 2008, governments have committed to subsidize demonstration projects for decarbonization purpose, thanks to financial stimulus, whereas before this period, in the first phase, we had mainly projects that were not subsidized and developed for commercial purpose. It's important also to note that IEA recommends 100 projects operating by 2020 to be on track with the decarbonization scenarios. So as we are today with 8 scenarios, we're clearly very far from these IEA targets. So let's have a different view of those projects. And let's see that today, actually, what it is clearly our message here, that CCS has been moving forward at 2 speeds. We have oil and gas related projects on one side, and we have that are actually running pretty well, and CCS in power or industrial plants without EOR that has stagnated. So if we account for the projects that are operating and that have passed the FID, so meaning the projects that are in construction, we have 16 large projects. All the 16 except one are actually related to the upstream oil and gas sectors, which is actually represented in this graph by the dashed area. So let's look at those projects line by line. We see that the first line represents actually the cheapest CO2 source, which is oil and gas processing. So when actually CO2 comes from natural gas processing plant or sand, or sand upgrading plant, we have 9 projects that fall in this category. 4 for EOR revenues and 5 only for greenhouse gas mitigation purpose, labeled here as non-EOR. So 4 and 5 projects. On the second line, we see industrial hydrogen plants. So they actually produce hydrogen from steam methane reforming for their own use, mainly chemical players like fertilizers. These plants must capture CO2 for their own hydrogen production. So regardless of any intention to store, it's in their process to capture CO2. So the advantage with this type of project is that we don't have to account for capture cost when we get to CCS. Capture cost would have existed anyway. So most projects in this category are built in conjunction with EOR to cover the additional cost of transport and storage. And finally, we have this third line of power and heavy industry. So here we have neither CCS power plant nor heavy industry like steel or plant that have passed FID without EOR revenues. Despite everything we've heard about the government commitment so far, there has only been 2 projects associated with power and heavy industry, but they are linked with EOR. So in a way, they are linked with oil and gas. Let's have another view of the current project. So the current project, the project actually abating CO2 emissions are related to the upstream oil and gas sector. The 8 operating projects are totaling 18 million tons of CO2 per year, which is the equivalent emission of a 3 gigawatt coal power plant. These EOR projects are mostly North America. We have 3 projects outside EOR, which are in Norway and Algeria, and they have proved the feasibility of injection in aquifer. We're talking about Sleipner, Insala, and Snowditz. The business case of those last 3 large projects was a low cost of capture from natural gas processing facility, industrial capabilities to store. So the people on top of those projects knew well how to store CO2, had a long experience in storage, and the associated government had put in place strong carbon tax incentive. Indeed, as you probably all know, the Norwegian project of Sleipner and Snøhvit benefited from a carbon tax of $50 per ton of CO2 emitted, which fully covers actually the cost of CO2. At least it justifies the cost of CCS. Sorry. And then the Algerian project of Insala had been a big hope to recover some, to develop CCS in this region. The objective was to recover some of the costs thanks to carbon certificate from the CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism of Kyoto Protocol. But actually, it has the price of carbon is so low at this time that it's not really an incentive. And we have understood that recently injection operations have been put on hold at Insala. So as by contrast to this relatively, let me say, rosy picture of a nice picture of EOR-related project, we see that the CCS in power plants without EOR revenues already facing strong difficulties, and actually none have passed FID. So in Europe, the projects that we can see in red in this slide have all been cancelled because of public opposition. So that also highlights our collective responsibilities to educate public and decision makers on the real effect of CO2 underground storage. Because there's lots of, actually there are very few people that really knows about CCS and about the danger or absence of dangers of CO2 storage. And there are a whole of crazy rumors that have been pushed to cancel lots of interesting projects. We had a discussion with an interviewee with a German utility that explained that in Germany, some people have called CCS the poison gas, which is really the sign of total ignorance in this area. So back on this slide, we also see that UK has recently suffered big setbacks on their project with Jonganet and the current NER 300 potential project, which is a bit going nowhere at the moment. In North America, cancellations are more due to economic reasons. Last year, the EAP Mountaineering and more recently the Trent Alta Pioneer project cancellations have made lots of noise and have been big setback for CCS development. But it's also important to highlight that apart from the large project that we show here, electric utilities in OECD but also in China have considered CCS really seriously, and they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars in pilot scale with CCS power plants of small units less than 50 megawatts, actually providing CCS technologies to power generation, which it actually accounts for 300 megawatts of power plants operating today with CCS. These are smaller units, and but it works, and there are lots of good examples and nice stories moving forward on that, and especially in China. Next slide, we look at the investment. So as a consequence of what's going on in terms of projects, we see that investments in CCS are still much lower than in renewables, and the public money allocated to CCS projects have actually not been spent. So what we consider as really money that has been spent in this slide 12 is the blue part. So what is the asset finance are funds that have been used for CCS projects. So total investment spent in CCS are in blue. They had reached 3 billion in 2010, and they have declined in 2011 and 2012. The government have allocated large grants in 2009 and 2010 as part of their stimulus plans after the financial crisis to boost a bit what the private sector could not provide. But as we said, most of these grants have not been spent yet. Compared to renewables, investment in CCS remains somehow insignificant, despite having a similar, if not better, decarbonization potential. we see on this graph on the right-hand side that CCS accounts for 1% of total investment in low-carbon energy technologies. It's not pure R&D here; it's total investment. So it does not contradict the previous slide when I said that CCS was third in the R&D spending. Next slide, as a consequence of this, we see that the development of CCS is not following its necessary growth rate as recommended by IEA for its demonstration phase. Actually, CCS installed capacity has been growing at 6% per year over the past 5 years, which is far from the almost 40% that is recommended to comply with IEA 450 scenario. So in this graph, actually, we have compared the percentage of growth rate in the installed capacity. So we're talking about gigawatts for all the sources of power that we have. And for CCS, we have taken the million ton of CO2 avoided per year, since we could not take, of course, gigawatts. Now let's talk about the economics of. So all that is our extract of our report. It's a bit dense. I hope you can catch everything. You have more time to read the long report, but here we really insist on the important messages. So in this section around economics, we mean that actually only the ER revenues compensate for the lack of carbon pricing mechanism. Only EOR, yes. So CCS actually greatly increases the levelized cost of production of a plant. Clearly, here we see that in power plants, in the heavy industries, there's a strong additional cost due to mainly the cost of capture technologies. For industries emitting high purity CO2 streams like ammonia or natural gas processing, the levelized cost of electricity is clearly less increased by CCS because the capture cost already exists, so we don't have to account for them. So yes, CCS costs. However, we still believe that CCS electricity could be competitive with other decarbonized options because first, it's not so more costly than other technologies, and second, it offers a base load or dispatchable capacity. So as we can see in this graph, the conventional thermal power generation, which is the line, the gray line, horizontal line, it costs $70 to $80 per megawatt hour in the US. So we were here in the US environment. In this picture, the CCS technologies ranges from 90 to 180 megawatt hour with coal and 110 to 120 for gas. So what is interesting is that it is actually cheaper than wind offshore or solar technologies. So it is expensive, but it's not so expensive if we really look at at what is required for other type of technologies that are more developed so far. And the other advantage that we have, and that the intermittent energy do not offer, is that it provides a base load or dispatchable capacity. So the main hurdle in terms of economics is really these large and substantial upfront costs that are required for the capture system. On this left-hand graph, we can see this picture of the infrastructure that's required to implement CCS. Actually, the capital costs required for capture are really huge. It's up to $1 billion for a 500 megawatt post-combustion capture system of first generation. And in that case, as you can see on the right-hand graph, capture hand-side graph, the capture represents 90% of the increase of the levelized cost of electricity. So these large upfront costs make it difficult for government to allocate public support and subsidize CCS as it would be required. CCS has the reputation of being a costly technology due to the mismatch actually between the short-term firm costs that are very high and the long-term benefits that are clearly uncertain. So what we see on this graph is that the cost of CO2 avoided from a CCS can be as low as $20 per ton of CO2 for high-purity gas processing and chemical plants. It goes between $50 and $100 for power generation and up to $150 for cement and steel. So the range of costs is pretty large, but these costs, unfortunately, they are certain. I mean, we know it's going to cost a lot, but the benefits are neither high nor certain. So that's the main problem. So carbon prices are far from being sufficient, as we can see here. It is below the less expensive use of CCS. On the second line that appears here is the average grant allocated to large demonstration projects, which is $15 per CO2 avoided, per ton of CO2 avoided, over the lifetime of a project. So it's an average. So the largest grant actually allocated has been of $13 per ton of CO2 avoided, 30. It is actually Future-Gen 2, which has received $1 billion to store 1.3 megaton of CO2 over 30 years. So we have done the calculation, and it would present over the lifetime of a project a grant of $30 per ton of CO2 avoided. And on average, we can see that in the various projects, the average of grants per ton of CO2 avoided is 15, hence the second line. Comparatively, if we look at the feed-in tariffs for wind and for solar PV, they're much, much higher. So for instance, in UK, the feed-in tariff for offshore wind is actually at 110 megawatt hour, dollar per megawatt hour. So that's equivalent to giving wind power producer $140 per ton of CO2 avoided. If the country was 100% supplied with coal power plants. And if we compare with solar PV, the comparison is even stronger. So what we want to say here is that, yes, CCS is expensive. Yes, the high upfront cost acts a bit like a deterrent for government to invest. But if we look at things over a lifetime of projects, we can see that actually the money being spent for wind and solar to avoid CO2 emission costs much more to government than what CCS would cost. So it's always easier to spend money in the future than spending it today, of course. But still, at the end of the day, if we want to do everything in solar and PV, which can be great in terms of CO2 emission, but it will cost much more than doing some large CCS projects. As opposed to those public benefits that are difficult to obtain, what we see that CCS EOR projects take advantage of the current high CO2 prices in the US, mainly. CO2 prices are actually correlated with crude price, therefore they are currently at high level. As we can see here, the CO2 prices are likely to be above $30 per ton when the oil price is above $100 per barrel. EUR have the advantage to reduce the transport and storage costs since we work on site. It also reduces the storage risk because the operators have a strong knowledge of their own reservoir. It does simplify CCS business models. It's much easier to develop a large CCS EOR project because most of the time you have a single operator throughout the entire CCS value chain, contrary to big project that associate utility with transporters, with companies in charge of storing. Technically speaking, EOR could allow to store a huge amount of CO2 globally. So we have not shown this slide here, which is actually in the big pack, but the potential for EOR-related storage is absolutely huge. And economically speaking, what we see that multi-frac horizontal wells have become easier to implement than CO2 injection to enhance fuel recovery factors. So this is we'll see how it goes, but it's not meant to be a great news for EOR because it might postpone some EOR project and some EOR associated with CO2 project, since we can do some things before that if we want to enhance the recovery of our field. So the message here is, as opposed to public grants, EOR project, CCS EOR project can have a justification without waiting for public grants. And today, because of the high prices of crude, CO2 has a good value, at least on the American market. So a few words on the perspective now. I hope I'm still on time. So we believe that the pipeline of CCS project is encouraging. We have actually a good pipeline of projects. We have 35 projects that are either planned or under construction or actually operating. So by that we mean that many power projects, and that's important because that is somehow new. So lots of power projects have been proposed. Mainly could be located in the US, in Europe, in Canada, and Australia. So in the short term, we still don't see big projects starting in Asia, and especially in China. We believe it will come later. Steel and cement industries are currently missing in the panel of CCS projects, so this remains the bad news. And we have a growing number of companies that are considering CCS EOR. So the problem with those CCS EOR projects is that they remain confidential until the contract is signed, because that would mean giving some information to the market for these oil and gas companies. So we may have more projects actually on the CCS EOR path. In terms of government commitments, so government have committed billions to demonstrate CCS, but at the present time, obviously governments are striving to allocate money to specific projects. So in total, it is estimated that approximately $21 billion will be made available to support large-scale CCS projects. 65% of these funding has been currently allocated to specific projects. The key change to funding arrangements supporting demonstration projects in the past 12 months has been a reduction of nearly $4 billion due to a more than halving values of EU ETS price and the withdrawal of funding from some programs that were deployed as part of the stimulus program associated with the financial crisis during 2008 and 2009. So today we are at the, I mean, you probably have followed the NER 300, so the allocation system in Europe. It has been a fiasco for CCS. No project have received any grants in the first round. Many projects, I mean, we were all hoping that UK would be the good, I mean, that good news would come from UK, but actually many projects in UK were forced to withdraw from the bidding process after they failed to secure the necessary financial guarantees from their respective governments. Since the NER 300 only funds, so the European Commission only funds 50% of a project, and the Commission requires that the Member States set out clearly how they intend to provide the sufficient co-funding. And in UK and in other countries, apparently the Member State did not provide those sufficient co-funding. Therefore, project has to withdraw. The only project that remained in the competition recently was Ulcos in France. The ArcelorMittal has cancelled it. Many people see this failure as a huge blow for EU plans on CCS, which is clearly the case, but it may be more short-term than a long-term issue. The second round of NER 300 funding is not expected before 2014. Sorry. The problem is that the current ETS, the current carbon price, which is down to around $5 per ton of CO2, and on this basis, the grant allocated will be fairly low. But we don't. I mean, explaining the study, but we don't see a big increase in CO2 prices in the short term. If we look at things a bit in a longer perspective, the pipeline of projects likely to operate by 2017 is relatively is limited to oil and gas related projects. Actually, 90% of the installed capacity will be related to oil and gas operations. So Europe is lagging behind its initial objective, clearly. The bright point in the future comes from the US, which are pushing for a closer integration between CCS power plants and EOR producers. And we also believe that China and the Middle East could become of prime importance for CCS, but that will not happen before the end of this decade. So it's not accounted for in these perspectives. Just to insist a bit on China, we see a huge potential for CCS since they have a huge network of coal power plants. It's actually the world leader in pilot scale projects for CCS, and it plans to export its capture ready power plant technologies. At the moment, they are only interested by the beneficial reuse of CO2, so through EOR, through chemicals or algae biofuels. We believe they could rapidly deploy CCS and reduce CO2 emissions, but that again, in terms of large projects, will not happen before the next decade. And the thing is that with China, they usually are very proactive, but as long as we are also committed. So it's probably a collective setup of objectives that will move China to really get on large projects. And the last word in the Middle East, we believe there's a large EOR potential as well. They have lots of projects planned, like Masdar, but nothing has passed FID yet. The Middle East is the region with the lowest development cost for CCS in the world because storage sites and gas processing facilities provide relatively low cost. And the problem is mainly one of their big problems is the water penalty that is required for CCS. So very quickly, just to conclude, what we want to push as messages in our report is that Meeting the international CO2 emission will be tough. Clearly, it would be difficult to do as IEA pushes for. Technically, we have the technologies, but we need to improve the reduction of the cost of capture technologies. But we cannot use CCS as a reason to say, we cannot use R&D, sorry, as a reason to say that we can move forward on CCS. We can do CCS at large scale. Projects associated with oil and gas production can be commercial today. It is manageable. We can make money with CCS projects in oil and gas. Therefore, it will remain the main drivers in the CCS industry for this current decade. The project remains at a standstill for power generation and heavy industry, because we clearly need incentives that today do not exist. Demonstration has been far slower than projected, especially in those power generation and steel. IEA has just renewed its call for action to develop CCS, listing its 2013 priorities. So recently, IEA has pushed again. I mean, 1 year ago, I think I remember IEA had issued a report which was quite pessimistic, but the most recent statements are really moving back to a more dynamic pitch and pressure, so that is really positive. And the last point is that public stakeholders need to increase support for CCS, and private sector needs to develop overall awareness of the benefits of CCS. And that is back to a point I mentioned before. There's also a role of the industry, of the CCS players like we are, I guess, or insiders, which is to develop the awareness of CCS to the public and to the decision makers that what we've seen clearly suffer for strong ignorance in that domain. Okay, so that's it for our messages. I hope I did not take too much time. Angeline.
Thank you very much, Olivier and Bruno. This was actually perfect timing. So just as a reminder, you can submit your questions to us simply by typing your question directly into the GoToWebinar control panel that you should see on your screen. We already received a number of questions for you, Olivier and Bruno, so I hope you're ready. One of the first questions we may address is the one from Steve Colley. Steve is asking, with the 7 projects past FID, what is the total quantity of CO2 storage estimated in future operations? What do you think? So with the 7 projects past, sorry, should I repeat the question?
No, the project under construction today, past FID?
Yes.
They are accumulating 30 megatons of CO2 per year. So actually, it's almost equivalent to what is already operating today.
So 30, right? 30 million.
Not 13. No.
13, 13. So for
these are
current
the
projects.
Only, exactly.
Okay.
The project only being constructed.
Okay. Yeah, so that brings us to 26 million total. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Thank you. Well, another question we have is from Peter Rowan. So Peter's question is, the titles say abandoned mainly due to a local public opposition, yet reading a lot of these, they are abandoned by financial issues. Can you explain your reasoning?
Sorry, Angeline, can you say it again? This one was hard to understand.
Oh, yes. In one of the slides, you say that a number of projects have been abandoned mainly due to local public opposition. Yet, when reading the explanations, a lot of the projects seem to have been abandoned because of financial issues. Could you explain some of the reasoning behind this?
Yeah, it is true that these projects actually need public funds and public support to finance the cost of CCS. So the public opposition might have led to a reduction of public funding for this project. But as far as we know, this project the main reason behind this lack of public funding might be a lack of local, local support for this project.
But just, Angeline, it's always difficult to say project by project which has been the real reason why it has been abandoned. But we have seen projects that had somehow secured the financing. The region was okay. There are some examples in Germany that are quite illustrative. You know, in Germany, the decision gets back to the land. So the lender has a final say. So the closer you go to local communities, the more inclined you are to be subject to public pressures. In these examples, we have seen in Germany lots of projects being cancelled because of public opposition locally, but very luckily. I think it was the same a few years ago in project in northern UK. So public opposition is a clear reason for the failure of some big projects in Europe, and also the financing in other instances. It is sometimes both public and finance, but it's sometimes only the public that has killed some projects.
Okay, so if I would sum it up, basically local opposition, public opposition could effectively block public funding to be made available to the projects. I think we move on to the next question. I hope, Peter, this is answering your question. I think if you want some further details that can be discussed afterwards. I will take the third question we have is from Robert van Dijk. So Robert's question is, most CCS projects are funded by the oil and gas industry. The oil and gas industry could have an interest in actually delaying the development of CCS in rising CO2 pricing. They seem to have mixed interests. So what is your view on that? It's a tricky one.
So mixed interest,
yes,
between EOR and?
So most CCS projects are funded by oil and gas. The oil and gas industry could have an interest actually in delaying the development of CCS in rising CO2 pricing. And they seem to have somehow some mixed interests here. So you could effectively think, I want to raise the price of CO2 because potentially there is a market for this in the future. I think that's how I would understand it.
Well, the way we see the point of view of big oil and gas players is they don't seem to have that much mixed interest. They think that they can store CO2 and increase the recovery rate of their fields. So the only thing they really pursue, to what we've seen and based on the interviews we've had, it's increasing the recovery rate of their fields. If it can go with greenhouse gas mitigation, that's fine. But that's not their prime objective. Their prime objective is to make business and to benefit from the advantage that storing CO2 can bring to them. The fact is that it goes in the right direction. The problem is, and that we really believe something should be done on that aspect, is that if you use CO2, natural CO2 that comes from the ground, that becomes the equation in terms of greenhouse gas mitigation is null. So what we try to push in our report is to say that when it gets to CCS, the CO2 used should be anthropogenic CO2 and not things coming from the ground. And the good point is that apparently the demand for CO2 is increasing a lot, and the capacity to find natural CO2 underground is pretty limited. So we should soon come in a situation where by construction, CO2 used for EOR will have to be anthropogenic. So that, and relatively naturally. So I mean, without having to push for regulation. So that is the good news.
Okay, well, I think that should answer a question Robert had. We'll move on to the to take more questions, as many as we can during this session. Mohammed Ahmed Khalifa and Peter Rowan had a question for you. So Mohammed and Peter's question is, looking at project development, do you have any project in Africa or India currently developing?
Not as far as I know, or not in a sufficiently well-defined stage. There have been, as you saw, Insala project in Algeria that has been operating since years now. And I'm not aware at the moment about projects in India and Africa, or maybe ideas of projects, but not yet.
I think in South Africa, Sasol has a project, but I think they capture, but they do not store yet. So we have not accounted for this project. But there are lots of small pilots and initiatives, but in terms of large projects that have some like material effect, we have not accounted for any one of those in India, neither in Africa, except in Salah.
Thank you. If I may add to that, I understand that a number of countries are currently looking at their storage capacity and storing the storage capacity assessments. And I think also looking into developing CCS roadmaps for a number of countries. So another question we have is from Nikolai Kinaev. Sorry if I don't pronounce your name properly. So Nikolai's question is, does the CO2 storage forecast take into account time required to prove the CO2 storage site?
Can you repeat, Angelo?
Yes. Does the CO2 storage forecast takes into account the time required to prove the CO2 storage site? So effectively,
no, this is a very good question. The storage, the CO2 forecast for 2017 takes into account the operating capacity of injection, but the CO2 is not proven yet that the CO2 injected in aquifer will stay there for millennia. We know it pretty well for depleted oil and gas fields, but for aquifer it remains to be proven, although it is hoped that the CO2 will with time dissolve into the brine and then mineralize and be sequestrated forever. The only way to prove it is to make a large demonstration project in aquifer, and those projects are subsidized by governments with the aim of accounting for the CO2 and monitoring what happens to the CO2 plume after injected in the aquifer.
Okay. Well, thank you. We'll take 3 more questions. I think it's now 11:31 Paris time, CET. So 3 more questions, and then I think we'll close. So the 3 remaining questions. You have a question from David Hanley. So David's question is, what role do you see for retrofit of CCS on existing coal and gas generation units?
So retrofitting CCS into existing power plants involves post-combustion capture technology, which is actually the most costly capture technology at the moment. And especially in terms of energy efficiency, the energy penalty of CCS would be even more important when applied to old inefficient coal power plants. So there are projects to retrofit coal power plants, but economically speaking, it's not they are not the easiest way to do CCS. However, in China, you have a huge amount of locked-in infrastructure from coal power plants, and if a carbon price is set at sufficiently high level, there will also be incentives to retrofit these coal power plants. But it is not the priority of CCS project developers at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Chet Biliok, so I'm sorry if I don't pronounce your name correctly. Chet's question is, you mentioned that CDM is not an incentive for CCS in developing countries. Could you develop that point?
Yes, actually CDM, the credit development mechanism of Kyoto Protocol, involved the trade of carbon certificates, which trades are still below €1 per ton of CO2 today. So it's a negligible price, and the forecast from Bloomberg, for instance, does not see this price increase in the future. So unless there is a strong, and as you know, the Kyoto Protocol will be prolonged, but you won't have international regulations before 2020 after the Durban Clean Development, the Durban Conference stated that the next generation of Kyoto Protocol will not be in place before 2020. So the price is too low actually to help this CCS project, although CCS is now included into credit development mechanism.
All right, well, thank you for that one. So we'll take now the last question from Steve Corley from BP. What assumptions have you made in the levelized cost analysis with regard to technology risk-weighted cost of capital?
Yes. So we mentioned something between $90 to $170 per megawatt hour for CCS electricity. These figures take into account first of a kind power plant. So these are our first generation capture technologies. The assumptions are, in terms of return on capital, are the average assumptions such as 8 to 10% interest rate, and a standard size for power plants, which is 500 megawatts, with onshore storage for CO2. Because we have to mention that offshore storage of CO2 will be more expensive.
Okay.
More details are provided in the report available online.
And also, Angeline, if we have such detailed question, I mean, we would be happy to have the discussion off. I mean, you can send our emails to participants, or I don't know how you want to proceed, but we are happy to have an individual discussion with a person that would like to continue the discussion if it's very detailed like that.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll stop the questions now, and as Olivier and Bruno mentioned, we can continue the conversation with them and get your responses out to them soon. If you still have questions, then please submit them to the Institute through the webinar inbox, webinar@globalccsinstitute.com, which you should also see on the screen or when you logged in. So a quick reminder that the webinar has been recorded and will be available on our website in the next few days along with the slides used, and you will find Olivier and Bruno's contact details there as well. Lastly, as you're leaving this session today, we've put together a very quick 2-question survey that would really appreciate you taking the time to complete. It's to help improve our webinar program. So I certainly hope that you found this webinar valuable, and then once again, I would like to really express a very warm thank you to Olivier and Bruno for presenting today. So thank you all for your attendance, and goodbye. Thank you.